So my name is Gianluca for everybody that doesn't know me. I am from Italy. I'm Italian, but live in Copenhagen right now. And I'm the founder of a company called AI Academy. So we do basically education around artificial intelligence for business people. So I've been lucky to work with companies like Procter and Gamble, Merck pharmaceutical company, some fashion companies in Italy as well. Some big corporations that want to try to understand what is AI and how they can use it in their business. And I'm also the author of a book named Zero to AI, which I published with Manning. And that's how I came to know you, Nishan. I'm gonna hand over the ball to you.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Nishant Bajaria. I've headed security and privacy programs at some major tech companies, Google, Netflix, currently at Uber. I am writing a book with Manning called Privacy by Design, which we are in the midst of renaming to Privacy Engineering. I've been in this field for a long time. I'm a recovering engineer. I lead teams and orgs now. I tell other people what to do, what not to do from a coding perspective, and mainly try to make sure that people do the right thing by the customer. So happy to be here, and I look forward to this conversation.
So there's something. Can I ask with one question for you that I've been wondering? Why privacy engineering? Because I think I've talked with a lot of people about privacy from more of a conceptual point of view, right? Because I usually talk with the business people that see privacy as either a problem or as something that they have to do. But I rarely talk about the engineering side of it. I
Yeah.
rarely see business people that say it as a practice. So I wanted to know your take on that.
Absolutely, and that is part of the problem, this disconnected, siloed approach. So there's a couple of social phenomenon here, right? The first one is we've told our engineers all over the world, I'm sure that's the case in the EU, any company that has this bottom-up culture where engineers are told, build your tools in your silo, ship them, we will make it a process-light atmosphere where there is no need to write unnecessary documentation. You can deploy stuff with a DevOps continuous delivery framework. As a result, the engineers who write tools have a limited understanding of how somebody else operates within the company. And that lack of context means it's very hard to manage data in a careful fashion. That's number one. There's lack of connection between different parts of the same company. The second aspect is the people who write the laws and the regulations. There was this iconic moment when Mark Zuckerberg testified before the US Senate in 2018 after Cambridge hit. And the Senate pro tem, Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah, asked him an interesting question. He's like, Facebook is free. How do you make money? And Mark Zuckerberg said, with a barely concealed smirk, we run ads. And a lot of the engineers I was with at that point in that room laughed loudly. They're like, oh, he doesn't even know how our business works. I'm like, that's a problem. This guy is an experienced US senator. He writes laws that we have to live by, and he doesn't understand our business. So the fact that privacy is seen as a theoretical construct, especially by the people who write laws, is a problem because the decisions you make around what you collect, what you do with it, how you use it, who you share it with, who has access to it. These are decisions made by engineers across the company at all levels, and they affect customer safety. Like I could infer from your data, Gianluca, who you are, where you live, who you love, what you eat. This is personal information that, depending upon where you live, could impact your safety, your well-being. So I feel it is a deeply engineering concept, and these solutions are going to be very, very technical as well. And not just technical, but they have to be architectural, behavioral, contextual. So that's what this book is about.
Yeah, I think the super interesting thing about this, which is, by the way, the reason why I got into AI as well, is that
Mhm.
it's so interdisciplinary. Like
Yeah.
it's something that you can't single-handedly solve with, some well-written code or, with some clever business idea. You need to put together a lot of different people with a lot of different ideas and, different backgrounds, most of all. So for me, my challenge has always been to try to explain these concepts that sometimes are, you know, I wouldn't say particularly hard, but they're certainly a little bit complex
Mhm.
to people that come from a complete different background. Like I would love to see if the US senator who asked that question to Mark Zuckerberg go through a basic AI training or a basic, data science training. Because I think a lot of people do not understand why Facebook needs the data. The thing that they like to spy on people. There's Mark Zuckerberg reading through my messages. So I think if people don't understand the use of the data, then how can they regulate? It just
Yeah.
like looks like these greedy companies want when I get the data goes it's cool. No, they need it for a specific purpose, and if you don't understand the purpose, you can't regulate around it.
Totally. And I've tried to take a pretty dual approach in the book where it's not just about people who don't understand the big tech use of data. Right? Like I've friends and family who visit me often before COVID, and they would ask me, how does company XYZ make money? Their products are free, right? And I feel the conversation has to be bi-directional. For too long, this expectation has been, companies collect data, they use that data to build products. Those products are available ubiquitous, they are transparent, they're free, they're available on all platforms, and it's a pretty even trade. But behind that even trade is a lack, to your point, a lack of understanding, right? What happens to my data? Who has access to it? How carefully is it kept? Am I getting my money's worth for the data that I'm giving, right? And I feel we're at this point where, we two people went on a very nice date. They had amazing, the violin played and the dinner was beautiful. And now we're in the who's going to do the dishes and take out the trash phase of this relationship between the non-IT community and the IT community, right?
Yeah.
So there needs to be some conversations. It's like a honey, we need to talk moment. That's kind of the phase of this relationship right now. And I feel like this is a moment for people like us to explain to the world why this data is collected, how it's used. That's number one. And the second thing is be careful custodians of the data once it's in our trust. If we do both these things, then those conversations will become a lot easier.
Yeah. How do you feel? Because you live in San Francisco, right?
Yeah. Well, in the South Bay, but close,
Yeah, I mean,
close.
that part of the world, basically.
Yeah.
So I haven't been in San Francisco or I mean, in the Bay Area for 6 years. How's the conversation there right now? Because I can tell you what's going on in Europe, what kind of conversations I had with people in Europe, but I'm wondering what's happening over there now.
Yeah, so I'll qualify my answer by saying that there are differences depending upon who you talk to.
Yeah, of
So
course.
my circle of influence tends to be other people at my level in the tech industry. And then, of course, beyond the tech industry, fintech, healthcare, those sorts of people, I talk to them often.
Mhm.
I also talk to VCs who often need to invest, in companies in the security, privacy domain. They come to me for advice. I'm part of an expert panel to that effect. I also talk to people on the policy side. The only people who typically follow me on Twitter, I have a pretty modest following, are people who follow tech from a journalism perspective. So journalists who often reach out to me and say, "Can you explain to me how this actually works? Because I'm writing a story on this topic. I need to understand." So I tend to talk to a pretty diverse set of folks, and then I talk to friends and family who are non-tech, so I can understand the non-tech perspective. So the conversation, Gianluca, to your point, is very mixed. The tech sector is looking at it through the lens of, oh my goodness, if we were to change our business overnight, this is going to be significantly disruptive. We have 5, 6, 7, in some cases 10 years of debt in terms of history, habit, data. This is not going to change overnight. Then there are laws like GDPR, CCPA, CPRA, LGPD that require compliance and change. And then there is the regular public that, on the one hand, wants the products. People love the products Silicon Valley produces, but they are confused by what happens behind the scenes with the data. So it's a pretty mixed conversation in the US.
Mhm. Yeah. I'm just wondering more from the tech side. Like I understand that a lot of these companies see all these new regulations as a problem. I'm wondering whether the approach is okay. Let's work together. Let's just try to find a way that we can keep doing our business, or whether they actually are gonna have to significantly reinvent their business. I think a good case is what Facebook is doing now with the new iOS update, right?
Mhm.
Where basically Apple just said, hey guys, this is the future. We can't keep let users being kind of in the dark of what's happening with their data. We're going to give them control. And Facebook is like, holy crap, this full panic mode. The two full pages on the New York Times. So it seems like there
Yeah,
are some companies that are going towards, okay, just that's it, we need to deal with this. We can't do what we've been doing for the last 10, 20 years. We need to fix it. We need to change. We need to find a solution. And some other companies that are like, oh, no, 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 this can be done. It's like, Apple is the first case, and Facebook is
yeah.
the second case, right? um does check out with what you've seen in the Valley?
Yeah, it checks out. And I don't know of two companies that have a different approach culturally to this conversation than the one in Menlo Park and the one in Cupertino. So I live in Mountain View in Silicon Valley, and
Hmm.
I literally am equidistant from the Apple and the Facebook campus.
Yeah.
And my point of view on this topic is probably a little central as well. So when I was at Nike back in the day, when I ran the privacy engineering program there, Tim Cook, the Apple CEO, was on our board. And this was also the time when Apple was having it out in public with the US government when it came to the iTunes backup code as well. So
Yeah.
Apple has a long history of taking a stand in a very public way when it comes to privacy. There are nuances to their stand on that, but Apple has been very open about it when it comes to user control. And their belief represents the belief of their clientele, which tends to be, at least based on data I have seen, a fairly affluent clientele. that would be willing to pay and therefore not be willing to part as much with as much data. That's kind of the general sense.
Mhm.
Facebook believes in the more Walmart model. We will build a platform that's for everyone. It's available. It's the internet town square, high engagement, high participation. And if you put friction in the process, if you confuse the users, they may not engage. If
Yep.
they may not engage, the data flow slows down, which means small businesses suffer. So these are two very different views, and these are not technical challenges. These are more cultural challenges, which is who owns the platform, who should decide regulation, and who should decide when the impact goes from privacy protection to business pernicious. That's what this conversation is about.
Yeah, I actually had a very interesting conversation with a few people because I published an article about the whole iOS 14 fight, whatever. And I was trying to explain people what happens when you click on an ad on Facebook
Mhm.
and, land on a page and then buy something. And then there's the Facebook pixel that just tells Facebook, hey, that user, they click on that ad, actually purchase the product. And because people get this idea of, okay, Facebook wants to read my data, as Facebook wants to spy on me. Well, actually, the most important thing for them is getting a label for a machine learning algorithm.
Yep.
The most important thing for them is to know which kind of person made a specific action, so they can then find similar people. And when I explain in this very simple way to people, I'm like, hey, just put yourself in my shoes as a small business. I give money to Facebook because I want them to push my message to as many people as possible. And Facebook, if they know who buys, they can just find similar people to them and can help my business grow. When you explain it that way, people are like, you know,
Makes
this
sense.
makes sense. I
Yeah.
can live with this, it's pretty all right. But for some reason, and I can't understand how that actually happened, I feel like the general idea that has been conveyed to people about Facebook, especially, or but in general about how data flows through the web, is evil companies want to know everything that you do, so they're gonna manipulate you into buying stuff,
Yeah.
which to some extent may be true in some specific cases, but not really. I mean, a lot of the stuff that the new iOS update is gonna change is just again finding labels for machine learning algorithms. And
Exactly.
people are fine with it when you explain it to them, but it's a long conversation. It's not something that you can just show a picture and be like, "Hey, this is what's happening." Okay, cool, got it. It's not something you can explain on a pop up. You know? Do you think? Do you have any idea about why the conversation became so tense around tech companies and
Yeah.
the public?
And therein lies the great conundrum of our time here, right? The companies that have built products that drove so much engagement, so much conversation, are struggling to explain their business model.
Yeah,
It's like a typical engineering story, which is an engineer wants to explain to you how their tool actually works, and in a matter of seconds, they go from 30,000 feet over to 10,000 feet under, and
yeah,
you lose them in like a few seconds, right? That happens with every engineer who I have worked with in my life, and that is happening now at scale with these tech companies.
yeah.
If I were in charge of the privacy program at Facebook, what I would basically do is on a daily basis, I would highlight engineers who explain how their product works. How does data come in? How does it get used? How does the decision making work? And you put in the caveat that this does not represent every use case, but this represents a few use cases. And the goal is to educate the public, so the people who give the data, the regular people who use Facebook on the one side, and the people who benefit from the data, that is the small businesses that you mentioned, how that connection is made. And then you explain that this interplay and this platform where this meeting actually happens, Facebook makes money off of this as well. Presenting this as a business transaction and the data role in that would humanize this process a lot more. You want to lift the veil a little bit. And for the life of me, I don't understand why Facebook hasn't done that. Because to your point, when you explain this to people, they actually understand. Now, there are two other challenges here. One is, how do you do this at scale? Because people have a lot of content coming at them, right? I'm watching this Facebook video where this engineer is explaining to me very sincerely how their tool works. But hey, suddenly there's a TikTok video over there. People tend to
Yeah.
get distracted easily. So how do you get people's attention so that you can educate them, is a challenge. The second thing is the tech industry has some lessons to learn as well. Let's not be coy about that, right? There have been breaches, there have been misuses of data, there have been people who've done things to data that they weren't supposed to do. There is a reason why the trust eroded a little bit.
Yeah.
So the education and the erosion are both challenges that need to be overcome. But I think the path you suggested is the right path. And my hope would be that these companies that have benefited from high engagement, high reach, high dissemination should now use those learnings to reach those very customers and educate them on the how, so that the product usage continues. Because to your point, the machine learning algorithm, this whole approach depends upon people engaging for the data to flow, good quality data to come in, and that virtuous cycle to continue. If you break that cycle, it's going to be hard to re-engage at that point.
Exactly, but that's the whole issue. Like again, I had to make some ads to promote one online course that I've made, and I logged in the Facebook Business Manager for the first time in like 2 years, and I
Mhm.
was stormed with pop-ups telling me, "Oh my God, this is changing! This is changing! Be ready for iOS 14 and all that stuff." I mean, it seems to me like it's almost like a war, on tech companies, and especially here in Europe. I live in a co-living space for entrepreneurs. So we are 21, and we had a Facebook group in the beginning, and there has been a period where like 2 or 3 people moved in, and they were like, "I don't want to have anything to do with Facebook because Facebook is evil. Let's move to Discord." And within 2 years, I saw always more and more and more people that wanted to shift away from these companies. And if you ask them why, their answer is Facebook is evil. Facebook is evil. And it's really hard to just get a rational motivation from them. Just make me an example of why they're evil. Like, oh, because the Cambridge Analytica scandal. But do you know actually what happened there? Like, does anybody have a clear idea about actually what happened during that time? Um, and the problem again is the way that I look at this is that this technology, these business models are so new, they're like babies if you think about it. Like when was Facebook founded? 2004, right?
Yeah, I believe somewhere in there. Yeah,
It's like 17 years. It's not
I mean,
even,
their IPO was 2012. IPO was less than 10 years away. So yeah.
it's it's yesterday, you know? And so all these mistakes that they've done, I mean, it takes time to learn all these things. It
Yeah.
takes time.
Yeah. I think
Um,
there's a question here for you. Somebody wants to know why they said Facebook was evil. I think that question may be directed for you in case you
Yeah,
want to take.
that's exactly the problem that I think a lot of people struggle articulating why Facebook is evil. I think the examples that they give is the Cambridge Analytica scandal. That's one example that they usually bring up. So when I mean the story that was told to the media about the Cambridge Analytica scandal is that there was these. Maybe also you have a different perspective maybe on this. I'm gonna tell what I understood about the Cambridge Analytica story, and then maybe you can chip in with your ideas. What happened is that Facebook had pretty loose policies in terms of data sharing with apps. So there were some people who built apps built on Facebook. They were able to get psychometric data from people. Some sort of like personality quiz tests. They were really big back in the days, like 10 years ago. There were all these little games. Find out what, Harry Potter person you are. And you just click on a bunch of questions. You answer some questions, and then they tell you are, Draco Malfoy or whatever. And with all these quizzes, they were getting a lot of, psychographic data about people, and then they use this data to get informations about the U.S. population, and then this data was exploited during the U.S. elections to make Donald Trump win. That's what the story that has been pushed to the media. Now, what actually happened is all these things happened, but my understanding of the truth of this interaction between the Cambridge Analytica, this consulting company, and the U.S. elections a few years ago is that some of the people from this company just consulted Donald Trump on his campaign, and from consulting to being actually able to exploit single individual data about a single person in the US, it's a long way. So
Mhm.
it's really hard to say that during his campaign, Donald Trump could target a specific American based on his psychographics, thanks to what Cambridge Analytica did. This is the story that I've read, and I just don't think it's technically feasible. So I don't think that's exactly what happened. What
Yeah.
are your thoughts on that whole story?
Yeah, it's interesting. So let me first talk about the micro targeting. So a lot of the targeting based on demographics data, based on location data, was done not just by the Trump campaign in 2016, but I believe a lot of it was also done by the Obama campaign in 2012. In the ensuing 4 years, obviously, the amount of data, the amount of engagement on the Facebook platform had grown significantly. So the impact of any micro targeting had also grown as well. So I think there was probably some impact. The second point I would make is, and I don't know if this number is correct or apocryphal, but people routinely say that a certain percentage of the US population cannot name the Supreme Court justice. They cannot name the Speaker of the House. So there is a problem of civic engagement where people don't know how government actually works. We talk about how tech actually works. Most people don't know how laws are actually passed. I shouldn't say most, but a significant number. So when you end up with a lot of data, when you end up with a lot of information, when you flood the zone with factoids or half truths or untruths or misinformation or alternative facts, as was iconified by the president's former press advisor, it causes confusion and it floods the zone with information. And when enough people say the same thing, people with low levels of information tend to believe that to be true. So when you end up with micro targeting of people, when you identify folks who, based on their behavior, might be willing to support Trump or might be willing to believe the worst about his opponents, there is something there in terms of, should you be allowed unmitigated access to a platform, and then should you marry that to the level of data that's possible? Now, there is a platform challenge here, but that is, to my mind, a very limited privacy challenge, which I agree with you on. That is the fact that the idea that individual data was compromised to the point where Facebook or Cambridge or the Trump campaign could uniquely identify somebody and flood them in a targeted way with information, that I don't think the story adds up. So Cambridge has become this thing where everybody makes it what they want it to be. If you support
Yeah.
Trump, it was great. If you oppose Trump, like I do, it was not great. So my sense is this is part of why having a clear understanding of these platforms, having a clear understanding of data would really help. If I'm running these platforms and if I'm benefiting from these platforms, I would get on the internet and I would try to explain, here's how these things work. But at the same time, I would actually build better data hygiene. One of the reasons why people believe the worst about tech companies is because there have been a lot of bad data practices on the privacy and the security side. So in the book, I talk a lot about how do you categorize data? How do you build out a proper catalog? How do you delete data? How do you give users transparency about their data? So when you do those things, people will relate you to the capabilities you provide them, not just from an engagement perspective, but a privacy perspective as well. And then they may not associate you as much with the larger macro political challenges of the day. I think that's where the conversation needs to go.